guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about the darker side of academia. Now before we get into it, I just want to contextualize the point of view that I'm coming at this from. So this is not to say every single academic is bad or to discredit academics generally, because I am one, so like I'm the last person to want to discredit people who shouldn't be discredited. That being said, as someone who has been inside the academic world, I've seen things that are alarming to say the least. And for that reason, I wanted to use an example of how academia can have really negative repercussions. Now, before we get into the specific situation, the reason why I'm saying the dark side to academia is because I find there are a lot of times where there are people who have studied a topic for a very long time. You know, they obviously go to school for it for a long time, so then therefore they're academics. A lot of the times I see them being given, I don't want to say they're given a pass, but it's like people are more likely to believe you if you've been studying a subject for a long time, because of course you're more knowledgeable than a lot of other people, and that's fair. That being said, I also feel like sometimes there's a false sense of security in trusting someone because they have studied it, even though their take may be dangerous, harmful, straight up incorrect, you know, factually speaking. And for that reason, I think that sometimes there are very negative repercussions. Let's just talk about this specific case, which is an example of where someone was believed because they were an academic, but really they were pushing a harmful narrative, in my opinion. It all starts from this guy who was called Helmut Kentler. So he was a German psychologist, sexual scientist, and professor for social education at the University of Hanover. While he was alive, I feel like he wasn't as controversial as towards the end of his life, and you know, now he passed over 10 years ago. So basically what Helmut Kentler did, Berlin authorities placed children with pedophiles for 30 years. Now, Helmut Kentler was a central part of why this occurred. Starting in the 1970s, psychology professor Helmut Kentler conducted his experiment. Homeless children in West Berlin were intentionally placed with pedophile men. These men would make especially loving foster parents, Kentler argued. Do you already see where we're going wrong here? Had Kentler not been someone that had studied all of these things, I don't think anyone would be like, yes, that's a great idea, let's put children with pedophiles. Like, I don't think any sane person would even want to take that risk, let alone if you have theories that actually these pedophile men would make good parents. Even if that were a theory, why would you risk putting children with them, knowing that there's even the slightest possibility that they might be traumatized for the rest of their lives? A study conducted by the University of, I'm gonna butcher it, has found that authorities in Berlin condoned this practice for almost 30 years. The pedophile foster fathers even received a regular care allowance. Helmut Kentler, in 1928 to 2008, was in a leading position at Berlin's Center for Educational Research. He was convinced that sexual contact between adults and children was harmless. And again, the reason that I'm saying that this is the dark side of academia is because he was accredited and he had studied the topics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever conclusion they draw is automatically valid and not harmful. There are plenty of academics in my field that have drawn completely different conclusions that in literature, it's a lot less dangerous than obviously a situation like this that deals with real people's lives, but nonetheless, there are plenty of takes that I just don't stand behind whatsoever, even if the person has been studying the topic for 30 years. Nonetheless, no one is above critique, but I feel like a lot of the times when you see PhD, MA, BA, whatever, a lot of people will give credence to what someone's saying, and that's in some ways natural because I know I've done that as well, but there still needs to be a somewhat of a critical eye or shit like this happens. And so apparently Berlin's child welfare offices and the governing Senate turned a blind eye or even approved of these placements. So one thing I also want to underline, some of the pedophiles that he placed the youths with already had a criminal record for child abuse. They already had criminal records for specifically child abuse. So even if we give him the benefit of the doubt, which frankly it's hard for me to do because any adult who thinks putting children with pedophiles is a good idea, I'm already questioning your motives, let alone that. But even if we wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, how are you going to justify putting a child with someone who has committed child abuse? Like, I don't understand how you just kind of sweep that under the rug, how you make it make sense. So like I said, benefit of the doubt here doesn't really work for me because there's no reason to give the benefit of the doubt considering everything we know so far. I think the other alarming thing that needs to be addressed is that these were homeless children. These were people that were already vulnerable. These were people that obviously wanted a house to live in. So it seems just like specifically insidious to take people who are vulnerable and then put them in an experiment, which you know that many of them would probably still want to be part of, so at least they can have a house. You know, aside from the fact that children don't necessarily understand what pedophilia is depending on their age, the fact that it's homeless children also adds a layer of disgust for me. Obviously, no child should be placed with a pedophile, but taking someone who really wants a house, really wants stability, security, you know, something that everyone should have, and putting them with people who are going to probably traumatize them in some way or another is a new level of gross. So then it says, several years ago, 2 of the victims came forward and told their story. Since then, the researchers at the university have plowed through files and conducted interviews. What they found was a network across educational institutions, the State Youth Welfare Office and the Berlin Senate, in which pedophilia was accepted, supported, and defended. Kettler himself was in regular contact with the children and their foster fathers. He was never prosecuted. By the time his victims came forward, the statute of limitations for his actions had expired. They also had thus far prevented the victims from getting any compensation. You see what I mean with the benefit of the doubt? It's very hard here to find any logical reasoning why Kettler didn't have malevolent, sick, perverse, degenerate motives. Like I said, this isn't a representation of all academics. It just underlines the fact that everyone needs to be critiqued, vetted as much as anyone else, whether they have 10 PhDs or none. This was never a good idea, and you know, you start to wonder who sits down with other people to make a decision like this and is like, yeah, we're gonna place pedophiles and children together in a household. And the reason I also wanted to talk about this was because, I don't know if you guys recall, but there was a TED Talk, I think it was a couple of years ago at this point, that was essentially pretty much trying to sugarcoat pedophilia and make it more, I don't necessarily want to say accepted as much as I feel like it was very oversimplified. It was very much trying to minimize the actual threats of pedophiles and the effect of pedophilia on children. And because it was a TED Talk, I remember a lot of people were bringing it to my attention. Most people that brought it to my attention knew that it was crap, in my opinion anyway, but I remember seeing a lot of people that were kind of swayed because the person had studied in the field. I think some people automatically took those studies as an extra layer of credibility that almost shielded them from critique, which is just not accurate. If there's anything in academia that you should do is critique things, even from your favorites, even from people you like. You know, if you don't agree, you don't agree, and you don't need to give someone a pass because they've studied something for years upon years, and Kettler is a prime example of that. The researchers found that several of the foster fathers were high-profile academics. They speak of a network that included high-ranking members of the Max Planck Institute, Berlin's Free University, and the notorious Odenwald School in Hesse, West Germany, which was at the center of a major pedophilia scandal several years ago. It has since been closed down. I'm gonna stop right here, but like, how many of these things do you think are coincidences? So there's Kettler, who supports and defends pedophilia and chooses to take homeless children and place them with pedophiles. And some of these pedophiles are high-ranking academics as well, which it'd be hard for me to believe that he didn't know that any of these were high-ranking academics. And then aside from that, one of these schools is also notorious for a scandal around pedophilia. Like, how many of these things happen to align? Which is why I think there was malevolent intent from the beginning, obviously, but here it just solidifies the fact that there's so many things that are just amiss. Berlin Senator for Youth and Children, Sandra Shears, called the findings shocking and horrifying. A first report on the Kettler experiment was published in 2016 by the University of Göttingen. The researchers then stated that the Berlin Senate seemed to lack interest in finding the truth. Now Berlin authorities have vowed to shed light on the matter. So needless to say, this experiment was disgusting, fucked up, at the expense of young, homeless children. Frankly, at this point, I just hope that the children that were traumatized have received compensation, so at least they can go to therapy or take care of, you know, whatever needs may occur due to what happened to them at the hands of the state, essentially. I also really hope this is being taken as an example, a reminder perhaps that these are not small decisions to make, and I think most of us know that. You know, if any decision putting someone's life essentially at stake is not an easy decision to make, but the fact that it just went on for 3 decades and nobody really cared to check, there was no even like revision. You'd think that an experiment that goes on for that long, that every, I don't know, year or a couple of years, they'd check back in and see, how are we spending our money? What are the results? And nobody along the line was like, guys, I don't think this is something we should be doing. It's just surreal. And some of it, I assume, is just political, and I don't mean political like what party you're in, but I can speak for my own experience in the English department of schools I've gone to. There's a lot that isn't logical. There's a lot that is like power plays or like who knows who, or like someone being connected to someone else and hence their paper gets pushed or they go to a conference as opposed to someone else because they know someone. In every single job or field you're in, there's a certain amount of political things that certain people will get away with things because of various reasons. So I think that also was at play. But frankly, it's alarming and disgusting, and I'm glad it's come to light because at least we can have the horrible conversation we're having now, I suppose. Anyways, let me know your opinions down below if you've witnessed something like that in whatever field you're in, whatever job, whatever situation. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always, and let's get right into the fan art.